What would you do if you were forced to marry a homeless man to be humiliated, only to discover he was a billionaire who came to save you and destroy your abuser in front of the entire town? The scream that tore through the quiet afternoon on Maple Street made every bird take flight from the trees. It came from the grand white mansion at the end of the block, the one with gold-trimmed windows and the iron gate that squeaked when it closed. Inside, in the drawing room filled with velvet furniture and chandeliers that looked like falling stars, a young girl stood frozen. "What did you say?" Lily Morgan's voice cracked like thin glass. Across the room, Evelyn Hawthorne sat with perfect posture in a cream-colored armchair, holding a cup of tea like royalty. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, it never did. It was the same smile she wore when she threw away Lily's favorite doll. The same smile she wore when she moved Lily into the attic and gave her room to her own daughter. But this smile, this one was crueler, deeper. It cut like a blade. "You heard me, dear stepdaughter," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with honeyed venom. "You're getting married next week, to the beggar who sits outside the church." For a moment the world seemed to tilt. The gold-framed paintings on the walls, the heavy silk curtains, even the flames in the marble fireplace, they all blurred in Lily's vision. She gripped the back of a nearby chair to steady herself. But he's just a dirty old man," she whispered. "He begs for coins, he talks to himself, he smells like—" "Exactly!" Evelyn clapped her hands together like she'd won a prize. "Everyone in town will see you marry him. They'll laugh. They'll point. They'll say, 'Look at poor little Lily, so unwanted. Even a beggar is too good for her.'" From the hallway, the cook dropped her wooden spoon. The gardener outside stopped trimming the roses. Even the fat house cat raised its head and stared, wide-eyed. Evelyn rose from her chair and began to circle Lily like a predator. "Your father left you half of everything when he died," she hissed. "Half the house, half the money, half the estate. But once you marry that disgusting man, you'll be so humiliated you'll run away. And everything will become mine." Lily's heart pounded in her chest, so loud she could hear it in her ears. Her voice trembled, but she tried to sound brave. "I won't do it." "You can't make me!" Evelyn laughed, a shrill, cold sound like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, but I can, dear child. You see—" She reached into a drawer and pulled out a document, its edges curled with age, its lettering ornate. "This is your father's will. It states very clearly that I am your legal guardian until you turn 21, and that's still 2 years away. Until then, you do what I say." The paper rustled like a snake preparing to strike. "I've already spoken to the preacher," Evelyn continued with delight. "I've even picked out your wedding dress. It's the most hideous thing I could find, yellow like old teeth, full of holes and mothball stench, perfect for a girl marrying a beggar." Tears welled in Lily's eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. Not in front of Evelyn. Never in front of Evelyn. "The whole town is already talking," Evelyn said, gliding toward the window. "Mrs. Peterson at the bakery thinks it's hilarious. Mr. Johnson at the post office said he's never seen anything so pitiful. Even the children are making up songs about you." The sun outside was setting, casting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, but inside Lily's chest, everything felt cold and grey. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you hate me so much?" For a split second, something flashed across Evelyn's face. The smile faded. Her eyes burned with a hatred that had been simmering for years. "Because your father loved you more than he ever loved me," she hissed. "Because you look like your mother, so beautiful and perfect. Because everyone in town says, 'Poor Lily.'" "So sweet, so kind. Well, let's see how sweet they think you are when you're married to a man who sleeps on the sidewalk." That night, Lily lay awake in the tiny attic room Evelyn had forced her into. It was cold, drafty, and smelled of dust and forgotten memories. The bed creaked with every breath she took. She stared at the ceiling, hands clenched in the thin blanket. She thought about running, But where could she go? She had no money, no family, no friends brave enough to stand up to Evelyn. Her father was gone. Her mother too. All she had left was the promise of humiliation. Downstairs, Evelyn was already preparing invitations. Outside, the wind howled softly. And in Lily's chest, a quiet fury began to flicker. The next morning, Lily Morgan was awoken not by sunlight or songbirds, but by the sharp clanging of pots and pans. "Rise and shine, bride-to-be!" Evelyn Hawthorne's voice rang through the hallway with poisonous cheer. "You have a wedding to prepare for." Lily sat up in her narrow attic bed, heart sinking as she looked around the tiny, sloped-ceiling room. The walls were stained, the single window crusted with dust, and the blankets were too thin for the lingering chill of spring mornings. She had lived here ever since her father died. Once upon a time, she'd had a room with bay windows, sunlight on her pillows, and bookshelves filled with stories. Now, she lived among cobwebs and cracked plaster tucked away like something shameful. She forced herself to get up and dressed before Evelyn could barge in again. There was no dignity in her situation, but she could at least cling to the last shreds of self-control. Downstairs, the mansion was alive with activity. Servants were cleaning obsessively, polishing silver, sweeping already pristine floors. Evelyn paced the hallways like a general preparing for war. "This wedding must be perfect," she announced. "Everyone in town must see exactly what happens to spoiled little girls who think they're better than me." Lily said nothing as she passed through the foyer, feeling like a ghost in her own home. Evelyn stopped her near the grand staircase. "Ah, there you are," she sneered. "We're going to the church." Lily blinked. "Now?" "Yes," Evelyn said sweetly. "Time for you to meet your fiancé again." "You'll want to get used to the smell." The church stood at the edge of town, with old stone steps and a chipped wooden door. Just as always, the man known as the beggar sat on the steps, legs crossed, a tin cup resting beside him. His clothes were torn and patched, his shoes mismatched. His hair was wild, his beard thick and unkempt. To any passerby, he looked like just another man forgotten by the world. But when he looked up and saw Lily, something strange passed between them. His eyes. They didn't match the rest of him. They were sharp. Clear, alert, not the dull eyes of a man who had given up. There was intelligence in them, purpose, and something else that made Lily stop in her tracks, something that felt almost dangerous. "This," Evelyn declared loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "is Nathaniel, your husband-to-be." The man stood up slowly. He was taller than Lily expected. Broader too, there was strength beneath the filth. And when he spoke, his voice didn't belong to a man who begged for coins. "Good morning, Miss Lily," he said, deep and smooth like her father's voice when he used to read to her by the fireplace. "Say hello to your future husband," Evelyn chirped, basking in Lily's humiliation. Lily could feel eyes on her. A few townspeople had gathered nearby, watching, whispering. She didn't know what to say, didn't know whether to cry or run. But then, the beggar, Nathaniel, winked. It wasn't playful or mocking, it was reassuring, as if to say, "Don't be afraid. I've got this." And for one heartbeat, Lily felt something impossible. She felt hope. The walk back to the mansion was silent. Lily kept glancing over her shoulder, replaying that wink, that voice, those eyes. Was he mocking her too? Or was there something he wasn't telling her? Back home, Evelyn was beaming like a child at Christmas. "I had the dress altered just for you," she said with glee, dragging Lily into the sitting room. On the couch sat a dress bag, wrinkled and lopsided. Evelyn yanked it open with theatrical flair. The dress was hideous, faded yellow. Fraying hem, puffy sleeves that looked like they'd been stuffed with old newspapers. It smelled like it had been in a basement for 20 years. "It's perfect," Evelyn said, smiling cruelly. "You'll look exactly as you should. Like a joke." Lily didn't react. She just stared at the dress, silent. That seemed to irritate Evelyn. She leaned in close, her perfume cloying. "You think this is unfair? You think I'm cruel?" Lily didn't answer. Evelyn's voice turned cold. "You have no idea what unfair is. You were born with everything. That pretty face. That stupid kindness. Everyone loved you for no reason. Well, not anymore." She turned and left, slamming the door behind her. Lily finally let out a shaky breath. She sat down on the edge of the couch, staring at the awful dress like it might come alive and bite her. And then she whispered to herself, "I'm not running." She didn't know where the thought came from. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the last echo of her father's voice in her heart. Maybe it was that strange spark in Nathaniel's eyes. But whatever it was, it kept her spine straight and her tears from falling. Let Evelyn laugh. Let the town whisper. Let the world try to break her. She wasn't leaving, not yet. The morning of the visit to the church stayed with Lily Morgan long after she returned home. She couldn't stop thinking about him. Nathaniel Blackwood. The beggar with ragged sleeves and matted hair. The man the town dismissed as worthless. The man Evelyn Hawthorne had chosen to humiliate Lily with. And yet there was something about him that didn't make sense. It wasn't just the way he stood, tall and composed despite his clothing. It wasn't just his voice, steady and warm, that cut through the noise of shame Evelyn tried to drown Lily in. And it wasn't just that wink, that strange, comforting wink that made her heartbeat skip. It was his eyes. Those weren't the eyes of a broken man. They were alive, focused, like he was watching the world unfold, calculating every detail. And for a brief second, when his gaze met hers, Lily had the strange, unnerving feeling that she was the one being evaluated, not pitied. That night, she sat in her attic room, staring at the ceiling again. But this time, something had changed. She wasn't thinking about escape. She wasn't crying into her pillow. She was wondering, "Who are you, Nathaniel?" The next few days passed in a blur of cold laughter and cruel preparations. Evelyn made sure Lily was paraded through town, her face pale, her spirit weary. "Just out picking flowers for your bouquet," Evelyn would call to shopkeepers who barely hid their smirks. Shopping for a veil, nothing too fancy, of course, wouldn't want to outshine the groom. Everywhere they went, people whispered, "She's really doing it? She's marrying him? I thought the Morgans used to be respectable." Lily bore it all in silence. But every time she passed the church and saw Nathaniel sitting there, still and quiet, offering nods to the passers-by, she watched him closer. One afternoon, she lingered behind Evelyn, letting her stepmother rant to the florist. Lily glanced toward the steps. Nathaniel was watching her, not the way the townspeople watched her, like a scandal on display. He was studying her, as if trying to memorize something important. She dared a question. "Why aren't you laughing at me like the others?" Nathaniel smiled, not cruelly, not smugly, but like someone who'd just been asked a riddle he already knew the answer to. "I don't find you funny, Miss Lily," he said gently, "not in the way they do." She tilted her head. "Then what do you find me?" "Still figuring that out," he replied. Then added, "But I know this, you don't belong where you are." Before she could ask what he meant, Evelyn shouted from across the street, "Lily, stop fraternizing with your fiancé. It's bad luck to see each other too often." Lily turned away. But she walked back to the mansion that day with her head just a little higher. The night before the wedding, the air turned heavy and strange. Rain threatened, but never came. The sky hung low and grey. Even the ever-confident Evelyn seemed unsettled as she paced the hallways, going over her guest list. "I invited everyone," she muttered. "The bakery, the post office, the butcher. The mayor's wife, of course. I want them all to see." "To see what?" one of the maids asked carefully. Evelyn's smile turned razor-sharp. To see Lily Morgan marry a man who doesn't even own shoes. That's what happens when you're kind, soft, and sweet. You get walked all over. She laughed to herself, not noticing the maid slip away as wide, hands shaking. Upstairs in the attic, Lily sat alone in her yellow dress. Evelyn had forced her to try it on again. It fit worse than before. The sleeves drooped, the fabric scratched her skin. She looked like a cautionary tale. But in the cracked mirror, Lily didn't cry. Not anymore. There was something building behind her quiet eyes now. Something that had nothing to do with revenge or pride. It was resolve. Let them watch, she thought. Let them stare. I will not be broken. Early the next morning, as dawn painted the sky in dusty pink, the town began to stir. But not just with gossip, with confusion, because something very strange was happening. Luxury cars, sleek, black, and gleaming, began rolling into the quiet little town. 12 of them, to be exact. Their engines purred like jungle cats. They moved slowly, deliberately, like a parade without music. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery stood at her window, dough on her hands, mouth slightly open. Who are they? Mr. Johnson at the post office dropped his coffee as men in tailored suits stepped out of the cars, checking their watches, scanning their surroundings. They weren't locals, and they certainly weren't here for pie. Children ran to the church steps to peek at the mysterious strangers. One boy whispered, "Are they movie stars?" No one had an answer. Inside the mansion, Evelyn didn't notice the commotion. She was too busy pinning Lily's hair into a crooked bun. "Smile," she said, tightening the hairpin so hard Lily winced. "You're the star of the show." Lily said nothing. She was listening to something else. A sound far in the distance. Wheels on gravel, doors clicking shut, footsteps. Not ordinary footsteps. These were polished, precise, and growing closer. Evelyn looked up when she heard the noise. "What now?" she muttered, moving to the window. Then her face paled, because outside the church the strangers weren't just standing, they were lining up. Straight-backed, silent, waiting. As if they weren't guests at all but guards. And Lily Morgan, still in her awful yellow dress, felt something shift deep in her bones. A storm was coming. But it wasn't the one Evelyn had planned. The church was packed, more packed than it had ever been. Not even Easter services or town hall debates had drawn this kind of crowd. Every pew was full. People lined the walls, whispering, fanning themselves with folded programs. Most of them didn't come out of kindness or celebration. No, they were here to witness a scandal. A humiliation. A social train wreck dressed in yellow. Lily Morgan sat alone in the back room, staring at her reflection in a warped mirror. The dress was worse in daylight, pale yellow like sour butter, sleeves too long, hem too short, fraying threads at every seam. It smelled like damp curtains and regret. Evelyn Hawthorne had chosen it with wicked precision. "You look perfect," she'd said with a smirk. Exactly like someone marrying a man who lives in the dirt. Lily's hands trembled in her lap, but her spine stayed straight. She wasn't here for Evelyn. She was here to endure, to stand, to survive, but a question gnawed at her gut. Where was Nathaniel? He was supposed to be here already. The groom. The beggar. The man who had winked at her like he knew something she didn't. The man whose eyes had unsettled her in all the right ways. Had he changed his mind? Had he disappeared? Was this the final blow Evelyn had planned all along? In the main sanctuary, Evelyn was glowing with anticipation. She floated through the aisles, greeting townspeople with fake smiles and fake concern. "Oh, she's doing the best she can," she sighed dramatically. "Poor dear, she just doesn't understand sacrifice like I do." Behind her, whispers rippled through the crowd. "That dress is a crime. She's really going through with it. Doesn't the guy live in a cardboard box? But then the atmosphere shifted. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, because something or someone had just arrived. The church doors opened, and in walked a man in the sharpest suit anyone had ever seen. Midnight black, tailored like it had been sewn onto his frame. His shoes clicked against the tile like the beat of a war drum. Behind him were 6 other men, all dressed in similar suits, all with serious expressions, all moving with quiet power. They didn't glance at the crowd. They didn't nod. They didn't smile. They simply moved forward and took seats in the front pew, the seats Evelyn had reserved for her snickering friends, the same Evelyn who now stared, frozen. The suited man turned around and addressed the room with effortless confidence. "Good morning," he said. His voice echoed to the rafters. "I'm here to ensure everything proceeds smoothly." Who are you?" Evelyn asked, stepping forward. Her voice wobbled. The man smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "Let's just say, I'm a friend of the groom." Gasps rippled through the pews. "A friend of the beggar," someone whispered. "Why would he have friends like that? This doesn't make sense." Evelyn's mouth opened, then closed again. She felt off balance, like the floor beneath her had tilted. This was not part of the plan. She was supposed to be in control. She was supposed to be basking in victory. But now there were powerful men sitting in the front row, watching everything. Judging, waiting. "Where is the groom?" Evelyn snapped, trying to reclaim her grip. "Why isn't he here yet?" Reverend Whitaker, who stood nervously at the altar, adjusted his glasses. "I'm not sure. He said he'd be here." He seemed very confident about it. "He's late," Evelyn hissed. "He probably wandered off to dig through trash." The suited man checked his gold watch. "He'll be here in 10 minutes, he said." "He's getting ready." "Getting ready?" Evelyn scoffed. "He sleeps outside." But the man didn't respond. He just returned to his seat, calm as ever. In the back room, Lily could hear the commotion, but didn't know what it meant. The murmur of voices, the click of expensive shoes, and then music, not from the church organ, from outside. Trumpets, actual trumpets, real musicians playing a slow, regal tune. Lily's breath caught in her throat. What on earth was happening? Out in the streets, people gathered along the sidewalks. Children perched on their parents' shoulders. Shopkeepers leaned out of windows. Even the mayor and his wife stood on the church steps, squinting into the distance. Because coming down the lane was something out of a royal daydream. A car. But not just any car. Longer than a limousine, sleek as silk, white with gold trim. Its surface gleamed like glass. The engine made no sound. Only the music surrounded it, commanding, almost triumphant. The car rolled to a stop in front of the church. A uniformed man stepped out and opened the back door. Every person watching held their breath. A foot stepped out, shiny black shoe, polished to perfection. Then the other, long legs in crisp trousers. A tailored jacket followed, and finally a face, clean-shaven. Sharp-jawed, handsome, confident. A face that seemed both familiar and completely new. The crowd gasped. Inside the church, heads turned. Evelyn pushed past people, nearly stumbling. "No," she whispered. "No, that can't be him." But it was. Nathaniel Blackwood had arrived, and he was no beggar. The doors of the church slammed open with a thunderous bang. Every head turned, and for a long, breathless moment no one moved. There he was. Nathaniel Blackwood. Only he wasn't that Nathaniel anymore. Gone was the man in threadbare coats, the matted hair, the tangled beard. Gone was the cup for coins, the slumped posture, the dust-covered shoes. In his place stood a man who looked like he belonged in a royal palace, not the streets of a small town. His hair was neatly styled, his jaw clean-shaven, his posture regal. He wore a tailored charcoal grey suit that shimmered ever so slightly beneath the stained glass light. A silver pin unmistakably expensive clipped his tie. On his finger, a diamond ring that flashed like lightning. He didn't just walk into the church, he commanded it. The crowd, which had been buzzing moments before, went absolutely still. A few people gasped out loud. Someone dropped a hymn book. A little girl whispered to her mother, "That's not a beggar. That's a prince." Evelyn Hawthorne's knees nearly gave out. She gripped the side of the pew to steady herself. This isn't possible," she stammered. "That's not the same man." But it was. Same height, same voice, same eyes. Eyes that now scanned the room slowly, deliberately, until they landed on Lily Morgan. She was still in the awful yellow dress, standing frozen at the back of the sanctuary. And when he saw her, Nathaniel smiled. Not a cruel smile, not a smug one, a warm, steady, reassuring smile. The kind of smile that said, "It's time." He walked down the aisle, each footstep echoing like a drumbeat. Every person in the church leaned back slightly as he passed, instinctively giving way to someone they now sensed was powerful. Untouchable, maybe even dangerous, he stopped at the altar right beside Reverend Whitaker, who looked like he was seconds away from fainting. "Good morning, Reverend," Nathaniel said politely, like this wasn't the most shocking moment the town had ever seen. "I believe we have a wedding scheduled." "Do suppose we do," Reverend Whitaker mumbled, fumbling through his notes. You're the groom?" "I am," Nathaniel said with a nod. "And you'll find I'm far more than anyone expected." In the front row, the mysterious guests, the men in suits, the woman with silver hair and diamonds, nodded knowingly. It was all going exactly as they had planned. Evelyn stormed forward, red-faced and trembling.
"This is a trick," she shouted. "You're supposed to be dirty. You're supposed to be disgusting."
Nathaniel turned toward her, slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't scowl. But when he spoke, the church walls seemed to lean in just to hear. "Are you upset that I'm clean, Evelyn?" he asked softly. "Or are you upset that your plan to humiliate Lily just collapsed?" Gasps. Murmurs. Someone in the back snorted. Another whispered, "She looks like she's going to explode." "You're not who you said you were," Evelyn shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at him. "You've been lying this whole time." Nathaniel took a step closer. "And yet," he said calmly, "you never once asked me who I really was. You assumed. You judged." "You used me." She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. "Tell me, Evelyn," Nathaniel continued, "have you ever seen me sleep on the street? Have you ever seen me eat out of the trash? Have you ever bothered to know me?" he asked, each word colder than the last. The church was so silent, you could hear the creak of wood as someone shifted in their seat. Evelyn's face flushed beet red. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish, gasping for air. In the back, Lily was still frozen, trying to piece together what she was seeing, what she was feeling. The man who stood before her now, he wasn't just some twist in the story, he was rewriting it completely. Then, Nathaniel turned to her. His entire presence softened. "Miss Lily," he said, holding out his hand, "would you do me the honor?" For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This was the same man who had sat on the church steps with a torn coat. But it wasn't. This Nathaniel had weight, gravity, power. And yet, the way he looked at her hadn't changed. She stepped forward slowly, took his hand, and felt everything in her life begin to shift. As the crowd stared, jaws dropped, Nathaniel leaned down and whispered something in her ear. Lily's eyes went wide. Then, for the first time in years, she smiled. A real smile. A free one. "What did he say?" Evelyn demanded. What did you tell her? Nathaniel just winked and led Lily toward the altar. Reverend Whitaker, still looking pale, cleared his throat. We are gathered here today. But he never got to finish, because the church doors burst open again. This time, cameras flashed, voices shouted. Dozens of people in blazers and dresses came pouring in, microphones, notepads, news crews.
Why are reporters here? What's going on? Who is this man? And Evelyn? Evelyn looked like the floor had just disappeared beneath her. She had orchestrated this wedding to destroy Lily in front of the town. Instead, it was quickly becoming the most public downfall she had ever faced. And Nathaniel? He stood tall, calm, confident, the king in the room full of peasants. And this, he knew, was only the beginning. The room felt like it had lost all its oxygen. Reporters streamed in through the open church doors, flashes popping like fireworks. Microphones hovered in the air. Voices spoke over one another. Is this the wedding of the year? Who's the mystery groom? Why did someone as powerful as him pretend to be homeless? Evelyn Hawthorne stood frozen at the altar, her face pale, her lips trembling. She'd planned this day for months, plotted it down to the smallest cruel detail. The yellow dress, the guests, the whispers. It was all supposed to end in Lily Morgan's shame. But now Evelyn was the one being watched, judged, measured. And Nathaniel Blackwood wasn't hiding anymore. He turned to the crowd calmly, with a confidence that didn't need to shout. The silver-haired woman in the front row leaned forward, her diamond earrings glinting as she whispered to the man beside her, "This is going to be good." Nathaniel looked at Reverend Whitaker. "Before we continue, there's something I need to say." The old preacher simply nodded, too stunned to object. Nathaniel turned to face the audience, his voice low but somehow reaching every corner of the church. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I imagine many of you are confused. You came here today expecting to see Lily Morgan, my bride, humiliated. You came to laugh, to gossip, to enjoy a little cruelty dressed up as a wedding." He paused. No one dared to speak. "But here's what you didn't expect," he said, his voice sharpening. "You didn't expect the so-called beggar to walk in wearing a suit worth more than most of your homes?" Gasps. "You didn't expect men in black cars, or national reporters, or bodyguards from Washington, D.C. More gasps. "And you certainly didn't expect me, Nathaniel Blackwood, the third heir to the Blackwood banking empire." A stunned silence fell like a stone. Someone dropped a phone. Rachel Klein, the red-haired reporter from Channel 9, stepped forward. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, eyes wide, "are you saying you're that Blackwood?" Nathaniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. He handed it to her with a calm smile. She glanced at it, then looked up, shocked. "He's telling the truth," she announced to the crowd. "He's the real deal. $3 billion estate, oldest son of Charlotte Blackwood." Evelyn stumbled back a step, gripping the pew behind her like it might save her from drowning. Nathaniel's gaze landed on her. "And you," he said quietly, "tried to make me a joke." "I didn't know," Evelyn began, but he raised a hand and she stopped cold. "Exactly," he said. "You didn't know? Because you didn't care." He turned back to the audience. "I sat outside this church for months, listening, watching. I saw how Evelyn treated the shopkeepers, how she screamed at children for being too loud, how she berated her staff, and how she treated Lily, her stepdaughter, as if she were nothing." He looked over his shoulder at Lily, who stood quietly behind him, her yellow dress still clinging awkwardly to her frame. But her eyes, they were wide, alive, and unblinking. "I watched Lily," he continued, "watched her give her lunch money to kids who were hungry, watched her help an old woman cross the street, watched her clean up after other people's messes, and smile through tears. He faced the crowd again. And I decided it was time someone gave Evelyn Hawthorne exactly what she gave others, public shame. The church erupted. Not in boos, but in stunned applause. Rachel Klein raised her microphone. "Why the disguise, Mr. Blackwood? Why live like that?" Nathaniel shrugged. "You learn a lot about people when they think you have nothing." He turned back to Evelyn, who was now openly shaking. "There's something else you should know," he said, "about me and about Lily." She blinked. What do you mean?" Nathaniel reached into his jacket again and pulled out a small leather folder. Inside was a photograph, faded but clear. "This," he said, holding it up, "is a picture of my mother, Charlotte Blackwood. And this," he held up another photo, "is her twin sister, Grace Morgan." Lily's eyes widened. That's my mom," she whispered. Nathaniel nodded. "Which makes us family, Lily." "You and I were cousins." The church exploded in noise, voices everywhere, reporters shouting questions, townspeople gasping, whispering, clutching each other in disbelief. Evelyn looked like she'd just been hit by lightning. "No," she said. "No, that's not true. That can't be true." But Nathaniel wasn't finished. He handed another document to Rachel Klein, a thick scroll with seals and signatures. "This is a verified family tree," he said, "traced by the best genealogist money can buy. It proves our connection, proves that Lily is a true Morgan and a Blackwood." Rachel scanned the document, then looked at the crowd. "It's legit," she confirmed. "No doubt." Nathaniel took a slow breath. "And that means," he added, turning back to Evelyn, "you didn't just mistreat your stepdaughter. You abused a member of the Blackwood family." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Evelyn tried to speak, but no sound came out. Nathaniel walked closer. "You thought you were marrying her off to shame her, to take her inheritance, to finally get everything you ever wanted." His voice dropped, ice in silk. "But all you've done is destroy yourself." Evelyn collapsed into a pew, her hands shaking. Nathaniel turned to Lily once more. "No more attic rooms," he said gently. "No more worn-out shoes. No more silence." Lily looked up at him, eyes full of tears, but not sadness. Tears of something long buried. Relief. She didn't say a word, but she nodded. The nightmare was ending. And a new chapter one no one expected was just beginning. The church had turned into a courtroom, but instead of a judge, there was a groom in a $1,000 suit. Instead of a jury, there was an entire town. And sitting on trial, pale and trembling in a pew that now felt more like a prison, was Evelyn Hawthorne. She looked like she was melting. The cruel lines of her face sagged under the weight of panic. Her eyes darted to every corner of the church, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. Nathaniel Blackwood stood at the altar, holding the attention of every living soul in the room. Calm, composed, terrifyingly patient. He turned once again to the crowd. "There's one more thing," he said. His voice was softer now, but no one missed a word. "When Lily's father, Edward Morgan, passed away, he left a will. Many of you know that." Murmurs of agreement. "He left half his estate to Lily." "That's well documented." A few heads nodded. "But the other half," Nathaniel continued, "was left to Evelyn, with a condition." He paused, letting it sink in, then reached into his suit and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with a wax crest. He handed it to Rachel Klein, who now looked more like a court stenographer than a reporter. "This," he said, "is the original will. Certified, unaltered, and very specific." Rachel opened the document slowly. Her eyes scanned the page, and then her eyebrows shot up. "It says here," she began, reading aloud for the crowd, "that Evelyn Hawthorne shall retain her half of the inheritance only if she treats Lily Morgan with care, dignity, and respect until Lily turns 21. More gasps. "Lily,"
still standing quietly near the altar, looked down at her shoes, those worn flats she had patched herself with glue. She didn't need a lawyer to explain what that clause meant. Nathaniel didn't even glance at Evelyn as he continued. "I think we all know," he said, "how that condition has been going." Rachel stepped forward. "We have witnesses. We have reporters. We have video evidence from today alone. And I've already spoken to 2 house staff who confirmed years of verbal and emotional abuse." Evelyn shot up from the pew. "This is a setup," she shouted. "You're twisting things. She was never grateful. She was always—" "Quiet," Nathaniel said firmly. It wasn't a shout. It was a verdict. Evelyn stopped speaking. Nathaniel turned back to Reverend Whitaker. "Reverend, you've known this family for years. Would you say Evelyn has treated Lily with kindness and respect?" The preacher swallowed hard, then answered with a single word, "No." Nathaniel nodded once. Then, as executor of Edward Morgan's final instructions, and with legal representatives already present, he motioned toward the sharply dressed woman sitting beside Margaret Blackwood. "I hereby declare that Evelyn Hawthorne has violated the terms of the will." The church didn't erupt. It exhaled, long, collective, and full of disbelief. Evelyn's hands shook so violently she dropped her purse. Coins clattered to the floor. "You can't do this," she said, her voice shrill. "That money is mine. That house is mine. I gave that girl a roof over her head." Nathaniel turned toward her at last. "No, Evelyn. She gave you everything. Her father trusted you, and you used her. You tried to destroy her." He stepped closer now, not menacing but resolute. "You don't just lose the money," he said. "You lose the home. The titles, the assets, all of it." "I have nowhere to go," Evelyn whispered. Nathaniel's tone was unyielding. "Neither did Lily. But that didn't stop you from throwing her into an attic and calling it charity." The church doors creaked as someone left one of Evelyn's few remaining friends, suddenly remembering they had other plans. Even the catty whispers that once echoed in the town were silent now. No one wanted to be on her side. Evelyn looked to the crowd, desperate. "Someone help me." "You all know me. I've hosted garden parties. I donated to the school." But no one spoke. Even the mayor, seated near the back, stared at her with quiet judgment. Rachel Klein raised her microphone again. "Miss Hawthorne," she said carefully, "do you have any comment on how it feels to lose everything because of your own cruelty?" Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it, and collapsed onto the pew like her bones had turned to sand. Nathaniel turned to Lily. She looked smaller than ever in that dress, but her eyes were full of something new now, not fear, freedom. He reached out and gently took her hand. "Lily," he said, his voice soft now, "you're not just getting justice today." She looked up at him, confused. "You're getting your family back." He turned to the guests in the front row. Margaret Blackwood, the silver-haired matriarch, stood and opened her arms. "We've been looking for you for so long," she said warmly. "Welcome home, dear." And just like that, Lily Morganonce, an attic girl with no future, was surrounded by people who wanted her, claimed her, loved her. Real family. Reverend Whitaker finally cleared his throat. "So, are we still having a wedding?" Laughter broke out light, gentle, a release of all the tension that had built up. Nathaniel smiled. "Not today, Reverend. But maybe one day." He slipped off his jacket and placed it around Lily's shoulders, hiding the awful yellow fabric. "For now," he said, "I think it's time I take my cousin home." And with that, they walked back down the aisle together. The church doors opened to a world that had suddenly become brand new. The church doors stood wide open now, bathing the sanctuary in golden afternoon light. Lily Morgan walked slowly beside Nathaniel Blackwood, her head held higher than it had in years. The oversized jacket he had draped around her shoulders felt like armor, like something sacred was protecting her. Every person in the room watched them pass, but this time, no one was whispering, no one was laughing. No one dared to look away. And then, just before they stepped outside, a voice rang out, hoarse, desperate. "Wait!" It was Evelyn Hawthorne. She stumbled forward down the aisle, tripping on the edge of her skirt, her heels clicking erratically on the church floor. Gone was the polished, icy woman who once ruled a mansion with cruelty. In her place stood someone unraveling in real time. "You can't leave me like this," she cried out, voice breaking. "With nothing!" Nathaniel turned slowly. Lily paused beside him, watching with unreadable eyes. Evelyn reached them, gasping, her hands shaking. "You don't understand, Nathaniel. That house, those accounts, they're all I have." "You're ruining my life." He looked at her for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "Ruining your life? You can't just take it all away." "I didn't," he said evenly. "You did." The room held its breath. Evelyn's eyes darted from face to face, looking for support, but every face stared back like a mirror reflecting the very thing she'd spent years avoiding. Contempt, judgment, pity. "You're not leaving me with anything," she shouted. Nathaniel shook his head, slowly. "No, Evelyn. I'm leaving you with exactly what you gave others: cruelty, loneliness, and shame." His words hit like a sentence passed down from a judge. Cold. Final. She flinched, as if struck. Lily took a small step forward. There was something almost sad in her expression, not out of sympathy, but out of recognition. She had once tried so hard to earn Evelyn's love, to be enough, to matter. Now she realized Evelyn had never wanted love. She had wanted power, and now she had none. "I spent years wondering what I did wrong," Lily said softly. "Why you hated me so much." Evelyn's lips quivered. "But it was never about me," Lily continued. "It was about you and whatever emptiness you were trying to fill by tearing everyone else down." Evelyn looked at her stepdaughter like she was seeing her for the first time and realizing too late that she had never truly known her at all. Nathaniel gently placed his hand on Lily's back. They turned again, walking down the steps of the church. But Evelyn wasn't done. She followed them to the door, frantic. "You'll regret this," she shouted. "People will turn on you too. That money won't protect you forever." Nathaniel paused at the threshold. He looked back one last time. "You're right," he said. "Money doesn't protect anyone from consequences." Then he added, "And neither does cruelty." Evelyn stood frozen in the doorway as the black car door was opened for Lily and Nathaniel. The moment they disappeared into the car, the church seemed to exhale. Guests began murmuring, trickling out in small groups, unsure what to say, only knowing they had witnessed something unforgettable. Outside, as the car rolled through town, people gathered on the sidewalks. But this time, they weren't jeering. They were watching in awe. Some waved. Some clapped gently. A few bowed their heads in apology or respect. The woman they'd once pitied in whispers now rode past them wrapped in grace and justice. Lily looked out the window, then turned to Nathaniel. "Was all of this really for me?" Nathaniel smiled, resting his arm along the back of the seat. "Yes," he said. "But not just to punish her. I didn't come to ruin a woman. I came to find family. To protect it." She looked at him, unsure what to say. So he spoke first. "You don't have to forgive her today," he said. "Or ever." Lily nodded. "I just want you to know," he added, "that starting right now, your life belongs to you. Not to a cruel woman. Not to a dead will. Not even to me. You." She turned toward the window again, blinking back tears. They weren't sad tears. They were the kind that washed something away, something dark and heavy she'd carried for far too long. Back at the church, Evelyn stood alone on the steps. Reporters had left. Guests had vanished. Even Reverend Whitaker had quietly locked the sanctuary doors. And Evelyn? She had nowhere to go, no keys. No house, no staff, no plan. For the first time in her life, Evelyn Hawthorne stood exactly as she had made others feel, completely alone. A gust of wind picked up and tugged at her shawl. She didn't bother fixing it. No one was watching anymore, and for the first time in her life, she knew what it meant to be unseen. Back in the car, Lily turned to Nathaniel once more.
You really stayed outside that church, just to watch me? He nodded. Every day. She shook her head in disbelief. You could have just walked up and said something. Nathaniel chuckled softly. I wanted to be sure. About you. About her. About everything. And are you? She asked. More than ever. They didn't say anything for a while after that. Just sat in silence.
The kind of silence that feels warm, safe, like a beginning. The car ride from the church to the Blackwood estate felt like a dream. Lily Morgan sat in stunned silence as the sleek white car cut through the countryside. The yellow dress still clung awkwardly to her frame, but Nathaniel's tailored jacket draped over her shoulders like a shield, like someone had finally said, "You matter. You're safe." She hadn't spoken much since leaving the church. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers lightly intertwined, the way a child might hold her own hands when she has nothing else to cling to. Nathaniel didn't push her. He simply watched the road, occasionally glancing over to make sure she was breathing steadily. "Where are we going?" she asked softly, finally breaking the silence. "Home," he replied. Lily looked out the window. Fields stretched for miles, giving way to long tree-lined drives, old fences, and distant hills. "Whose home?" she whispered. Nathaniel glanced at her with a gentle smile. "Yours." The car turned down a long, winding path. It was paved with cobblestones and flanked by tall oaks, their branches weaving together overhead like a cathedral. At the end of the road stood a grand estate. Not cold or imposing like Evelyn's mansion. This place felt alive. The stone walls were warm in the afternoon light. Ivy curled up the sides in soft green spirals. Windows gleamed, fresh flowers bloomed along the walkway. And standing in front of the wide oak doors were half a dozen people waiting. When the car stopped, Nathaniel stepped out first. He walked around to open the door for Lily, then offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. The moment her feet touched the gravel driveway, the silver-haired woman, Margaret Blackwood, stepped forward. "Lily," she said warmly, tears already in her eyes, "we've waited so long to meet you." Lily looked stunned. "You knew I existed?" Margaret nodded. "Your mother was my sister-in-law. We searched for years. We thought maybe something had happened, that we lost you forever." Lily blinked. "But Evelyn, she always said we didn't have anyone, that my mother's family was gone." "She lied," Margaret said softly, "to keep you isolated, to keep control." Lily glanced down. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I always felt alone." Margaret took her hand. "Not anymore." One by one, the others came forward, uncles, cousins, aunts, people who had once been names in documents or faces in faded photos. But now they were real, and every one of them looked at Lily not like a stranger, but like family. They hugged her. They smiled. They cried. And Lily, who had once eaten dinner in silence at a long table in a cold mansion, suddenly found herself surrounded by warmth, by belonging. Inside the estate, everything felt like sunlight. Polished wood floors, light spilling through tall windows, framed photos of loved ones, some old, some new, lined the hallways. The air smelled of fresh bread and lavender. Margaret showed Lily to a guest room overlooking the gardens. The moment Lily stepped inside, she stopped. There were bookshelves. Real ones, a bay window seat with cushions and soft blankets, and on the bed, a new dress folded carefully. Soft cream fabric, simple, elegant. Not yellow. Just until we find your style, Margaret said with a wink. Lily turned to her, eyes wet. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, dear, Margaret replied. Just rest. Heal. Live. Lily sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the fabric. She had never owned something that was hers, not since her mother died. And now, someone had chosen this for her. Not to control her, but to care for her. Later that evening, she walked the gardens alone. It was quiet, but not the kind of silence that crushed her in Evelyn's attic. This silence was full of promise, of beginnings. She wandered past rose bushes, flowering trees, and marble benches nestled in alcoves. At the far end of the garden, she found Nathaniel standing beside a small fountain. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. Getting used to things? He asked. She nodded. It's strange. Strange good or strange overwhelming? She laughed gently. A little of both. He sat down on the edge of the fountain. I wanted you to have space today, but I also want you to know this isn't charity. You're not here because you were rescued. She tilted her head. Then why? Because you're family, he said, and family protects each other. She walked over and sat beside him. I never thought I'd have that, she admitted. Nathaniel looked at her carefully. You've always had it. We just had to find our way back to each other. They sat in silence for a while, watching the water ripple. Then Lily turned to him. Are you always this good at pretending to be a beggar? Nathaniel chuckled. Let's just say, I've always been good at seeing through people. I wanted to know who would look at me and still see a human being. Lily smiled. I think you found the right person. He nodded slowly. I think I did too. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting the garden in soft gold, Lily realized something. For the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. She wasn't bracing for cruelty, or punishment, or silence. She was home, and it felt like peace. A week had passed since the wedding that never happened, but people were still talking about it. In the town square, at the bakery, outside the post office, everyone had their version of the story. Some said Nathaniel Blackwood had arrived in a car flown in from Switzerland. Others claimed he was secretly a royal. One thing everyone agreed on: Evelyn Hawthorne's days of power were over. She'd been forced out of the Morgan estate within 24 hours, and not quietly. Cameras had caught her being escorted out alone, surrounded by suitcases she could barely carry herself. The same woman who once barked orders at staff now stood on the sidewalk in front of the very house she used to rule, watching as the gates locked behind her. Lily Morgan didn't watch the footage. She didn't need to. Evelyn's punishment wasn't about revenge, it was about balance. About truth catching up, no matter how fast someone runs. Still, part of her wondered where Evelyn had gone. That question was answered 2 weeks later when Lily received a small envelope in the mail. No return address, no message inside, just a wrinkled photo of the old yellow wedding dress, tossed in a public trash bin. It didn't make her laugh. It didn't make her cry. She just closed the envelope and tucked it away. Another piece of her past she no longer needed. The Blackwood estate bloomed with early summer light. Lily spent her days helping in the gardens, reading in sunlit corners and slowly, so slowly, unlearning the instinct to flinch at kindness. Margaret Blackwood insisted she take her time adjusting. You've been surviving for so long, sweetheart, the older woman said, brushing a lock of hair behind Lily's ear. Now it's time to live. And for once, Lily believed it was possible. One morning, she woke up to find a new envelope at her door. This one wasn't wrinkled. It was sealed with a silver crest. Inside, an invitation, not to a party, not to a gala, to a school, a university, in fact one that bore the Blackwood name. "I pulled a few strings," Nathaniel said when she looked at him with wide eyes. "You always talked about being invisible. I figured it's time the world sees what you're capable of." "But I never finished high school," she whispered.
"You'll have tutors," he said. "Mentors, every resource you need." She stared at the letter again.
It wasn't about grades, it was about worth. Someone finally believed she had it. Months passed, and slowly the headlines changed. From Blackwood heir's shocking wedding reveal, to the cousin who inherited a fortune, to Lily Morgan, the quiet force behind the Blackwood legacy. She didn't chase fame. She didn't ask for attention. But the world noticed anyway, because kindness leaves ripples. And Lily? She was the kind of woman who smiled at the mailman, remembered every gardener's birthday, and once stopped an entire board meeting just to ask if the intern needed a glass of water. People remembered that. They felt that. And in a world full of noise, her gentleness spoke louder than anything. As for Evelyn, whispers said she was living in a small apartment 2 towns over. No servants, no invitations, no power. Some said she tried to write a memoir, painting herself as the real victim. It didn't sell. The publishers said it lacked authenticity. Others claimed she spent her days walking through thrift stores, muttering to herself, still trying to understand how the world had slipped away. But Lily never spoke ill of her. Not once. When asked in interviews, she'd just say, "Everyone chooses what they plant in the world. Eventually, they harvest it." It was her way of saying, "I'm done carrying her in my story." And she was. 1 year after the almost wedding, the Blackwood estate hosted a gathering. Not a party, a celebration. Lily stood in the center of the garden, dressed in a soft blue gown, her hair loose in the breeze. Around her were people who once felt like strangers and now felt like roots. Nathaniel stood beside her, a glass of sparkling cider in hand. "I hope you know," he said with a grin, "this isn't an engagement party. Yet." She laughed. "Not yet," she teased, "but someday?" She looked at him, at the man who pretended to be nothing, just to find someone who could see everything. She nodded. "Someday." As the sun dipped low and fairy lights blinked on overhead, Lily glanced around the garden. Every face smiled back. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was in someone else's life. She was exactly where she belonged. Moral of the story: what goes around, comes around. This story reminds us, kindness is never wasted. Lily's gentle heart didn't make her weak, it made her unforgettable. Cruelty has a cost. Evelyn thought she was untouchable. She forgot that character is louder than reputation. Appearances deceive. The beggar turned out to be a billionaire, and the one person who saw through it all was the one everyone overlooked. Family isn't just blood, it's the people who choose you, fight for you, and walk with you. And most of all, justice doesn't always arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes it walks into a church, wearing a suit, carrying a secret, and handing someone their own downfall with a smile. Life has a way of revealing who we truly are, not through what we say, but how we treat those we believe can't fight back. This story reminds us that kindness is never weakness, and cruelty never goes unaccounted for. Lily Morgan lived in silence, enduring humiliation and loss. Yet, she remained kind. She gave when she had little. She listened when no one else cared, and in the end, her quiet integrity became her greatest shield. Evelyn Hawthorne, on the other hand, built her world on control and appearances. But as life often proves, what you give to others comes back to you eventually, and often when it matters most. For older audiences who've seen many chapters of life, This tale reaffirms a timeless truth. Dignity, compassion, and humility never go out of style. We may not all wear suits or inherit fortunes, but we all leave behind a legacy in how we treat people. So be like Lily. Even when no one is watching, choose decency, because in the end, it's not status that defines us, but the strength of our character